So here we are headed into round 2 of the NBA playoffs. So I was right about a few things in these first round matchups, and I was definitely wrong about a few things. But I mean, whenever you do these predictions for any sport in any game and any set of playoffs, you're going to be right about some shit, you're going to be wrong about some shit. I know what I signed up for. Regardless, the next move here is just to quickly recap what happened in the first round, take those observations into the second round matchups, and make our predictions accordingly. Now, one thing to keep in mind before we go any further is that some of the first round matchups, particularly in the East, are already finished and are moved on to their second round. The NBA seemed to put on a bit of a mandate to kind of expedite the process. They don't want to wait for the first round to completely conclude before they start all the second round matchups. So by the time you listen to this, we'll probably be already at least through game 1 of Celtics Raptors and maybe game 1 of the Heat Bucks series as well, as the schedule is a bit staggered. But fuck it, here we go. Starting off in the Eastern Conference, we have what's probably going to be the best matchup of the second round between the Raptors and the Celtics. What's great about this matchup is that these two teams are so similar. They look a lot alike as far as their weapons offensively. They're both really well coached and incredibly disciplined defensively. They're also two of the best teams in the league as far as putting together a system defensively to take the best player on the opposite team out of their game. We saw this especially with the Celtics first round series against Philly, and that they were able to completely take Joel Embiid out of his comfort zone, live what he was able to get by earning it inside and living with whatever inconsistent outside shooting Philly had. While I'm not particularly surprised that the Celtics came out and won that series playing that way, I am surprised that they were able to pull off a sweep. I mean, I know Philly didn't have Ben Simmons, but I expected more of a fight than that. While we didn't see this defensive approach as much in the Toronto series simply because the matchup didn't call for it, we've seen again and again the Raptors use the box and one while up the perimeter and close out shots against any other team in the league to take out the number 1 option, or at least keep them in check. I'll be looking for this approach coming from both teams. For the Raptors, they'll probably look to do what they can to keep Jason Tatum out of his comfort zone and make his shots as difficult as possible. While Kemba Walker's a great scorer in his own right, I feel like the Raptors can live with whatever he does offensively so long as they keep Tatum in check, especially with Gordon Hayward being out for the series. I mean, that's a lot of scoring taken away from the Celtics. For the Celtics, it'll likely be the same idea as far as trying to take Pascal Siakam shots and making them more difficult and living with whatever Kyle Lowry and Fred VanVleet do. The issue there is you can argue the Raptors have a bit more depth and a bit more potent scoring. However, the Celtics do have an excellent defensive system and are really good at rotating on the perimeter and making shots difficult and playing passing lanes, so that could play to their advantage. The issue I see here for the Celtics is their ability to guard the inside. I mean, they really don't have anybody to check Marc Gasol if there's some inside touches to him. While he's not the number 1 option on the Raptors offense, he could prove dangerous in this matchup. While I wouldn't expect Gasol to put 40 on anybody's head, he does have the incredible ability to facilitate offense outside the low block. Gasol's low post playmaking ability, along with the slashers and outside shooters that Toronto has, I think that could play to a big advantage. It could really be an X factor in this series. One key component to keep in mind here is Kyle Lowry's ankle. He sprained it the other day and was just cleared to play game 1, but we don't know what kind of condition he's going to be in. Guys playing hurt, and his matchup against Kemba Walker could end up playing advantage to the Celtics because there's a weak point that they can attack. What I think this will come down to is coaching. This is going to be an incredibly tough and exciting series, and I bet my bottom dollar that it goes the distance, but I do think the Raptors have an ever so slight advantage in depth and coaching ability. While Brad Stevens is a great coach, I do think Nick Nurse seems to be just a step ahead of everybody else every time I see them play. Really tough call here, and ignore my bias, but I'm going to take the Raptors in 7. The other semifinal matchup in the East actually has some serious upset potential. It's between the Bucks and the Miami Heat. Both these teams go into the second round series relatively fresh after pretty easily dismantling both their first round matchups, with Miami doing an excellent job bringing Bubble TJ Warren back down to earth and keeping everybody else in check, and Milwaukee successfully pulling off the douchebag sweep after DJ Augustine struck once again. My immediate thought going into this series is I think we're going to see more than ever how much the Bucks miss the play of Malcolm Brogdon. I was initially concerned coming into the playoffs about Miami's shooting and how consistent they would be, but they've looked fantastic and they look on point going into this series. The Miami Heat also match up extremely well defensively against Milwaukee's system. Bam Adebayo is one of the better defenders against Giannis Antetokounmpo in the entire league, while Jimmy Butler, Andre Iguodala, and Jay Crowder are incredibly rangy perimeter defenders in their own right. Potential issues here for Milwaukee is that they don't have a lot of outside shot creation. I mean, Chris Middleton's a great shooter but doesn't shoot well off the dribble. and especially against Miami's perimeter defenders, that'll be especially tough. As it stands this season, Brook Lopez and Eric Bledsoe also don't have enough three-point potency to really respect it, so Miami can essentially just leave those guys open and live with whatever they make. Let's go back to my earlier point about Malcolm Brogdon. Now, when he played for the Bucks last year, he was the one guy that was able to create shots and facilitate some extra plays and create room for the other shooters to spread out a more efficient offense against particularly tougher defenses, notably in 2019 against the Raptors in their championship run. While they didn't win that series, Brogdon was the one guy who showed up on a consistent basis, and the Bucks being without him might be a glaring weakness against this Miami team. The key for Miami to pull off an upset in this series will be their outside shooting. I mean, Jimmy and Bam are going to do what they do, but do you have enough outside firepower to really punish the Bucks drop and chase system? Miami consistently knocking down threes off the driving kick, along with Eric Spoelstra's situational coaching adaptability, will be key if they want to pull off the upset. While that will likely be Miami's approach and an upset wouldn't shock me here, I do feel like the Bucks are still too disciplined defensively, and I feel like Greek the Freak is just too dynamic of a player. This is the Bucks' first real playoff test, and I think we'll start to see them look more like the team they looked like before the return. This series also goes the distance, but I like Milwaukee's chances of adapting to Miami's defense, and I'll take the Bucks in 7 games as well. Moving on to the Western Conference matchups in the second round, and we'll look at the Rockets and the Lakers. Now, while I'm definitely disappointed the Thunder weren't able to win in Game 7, and it's easy to point out the officiating reared its ugly head once again, but I will give credit where it's due. Houston looked a lot better defensively, and James Harden did make up for a really bad shooting game by making a great defensive stop at the end of the game. There it is, I gave him credit. This upcoming series between the Rockets and Lakers, however, I feel like it's going to look a lot different. Game 1 in any playoff series usually works out like a feeling out process where teams will go into it with the strategy they planned, see what works, see what doesn't work, and adjust accordingly. I think this matchup is going to feel a lot like your first time driving stick. It's going to be a little clunky, a little awkward, and I think there's going to be a lot of adjustments throughout. It'll basically feel like one giant game won the entire series. I expect a lot of lineup changes, a lot of defensive strategy changes, and a lot of offensive adjustments from both teams throughout. The Thunder had one guy in Luka Dort they were able to throw on Harden and have him stick him for the majority of the series to much success, whereas the Lakers have a bunch of different tools that they're going to throw at James Harden, and that could end up working to their advantage as well. Frank Vogel manages these defensive matchups really depends on the player Russell Westbrook as well. Westbrook looked a lot better in Game 7 but was shaky in Game 6, and we're not sure exactly how healthy he is going into this series. With more wear and tear with a pre-existing injury that he might have come back too early from, it's tough to tell what version of Westbrook we're going to get going in. I look for a pretty sporadic combination of Danny Green, Alex Caruso, Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, and maybe even a little bit of Rondo if he's back and healthy, for the Lakers to throw at Westbrook and Harden throughout shifts in the series. And while LeBron's not the defender he used to be, he's more than capable of getting a stop here and there, so look at him to match up against James Harden in some late game situations throughout the series as well. Because of the Rockets going in with the micro ball approach once again, Anthony Davis, whether he likes it or not, will be playing a lot of center. The Lakers are probably not going to be able to throw JaVale McGee and Dwight Howard major minutes, at least early on in the series, unless it's in specialty situations. Houston will once again depend on a 5-out offense, some run and gun, and obviously depend on the whistle as they usually do, in hopes of pulling off the upset against the Lakers. While I honestly feel like this isn't going to be very enjoyable basketball because it's just such a goofy matchup, I look for the Lakers to take care of business here. I just think they're way better defensively, and Anthony Davis has an opportunity to really punish the Rockets defense like I thought Steven Adams should have throughout this series. Look for a lot of LeBron AD pick and roll, some outside looks, a lot of drive and kick, and I just don't see Houston stopping that. I will say the Lakers in 6 games. Moving on to the other Western Conference matchup, we have the Denver Nuggets taking on the LA Clippers. Now with this series, the defensive matchup with the Clippers, I see a lot of similarities in what they faced in Dallas, with one notable exception, Nikola Jokic. Jamal Murray offers a similar scoring threat against the Clippers perimeter D as Doncic did in the previous series, but the Clippers obviously match up really well with that, with Kawhi, Paul George, and an ideally healthy Patrick Beverley. Where the Nuggets could prove really dangerous, however, is in their Jokic-Murray pick and roll. Jokic's touch on the inside could be a huge threat to LA's rim protection, whereas Jamal Murray is a great scorer and facilitator off the pick and roll, so they could really use that to their advantage and pick apart an otherwise flawless Clippers defense in this series. Now it'll be up to Doc Rivers to appropriately game plan for the Nuggets offense, particularly how he matches up against Nikola Jokic. While Montrezl Harrell seems like the go-to guy to match minutes with Jokic throughout the series, Ivica Zubac has actually emerged as the Clippers' best rim protector so far in these playoffs, and Doc needs to go back to trusting him a little bit more and throw some combination of that duo along with a few short spurts of Patrick Patterson and maybe a little Joakim Noah as well. What I think decides this series is the fact that the Nuggets just don't have quite enough lockdown defense to prevent Kawhi Leonard and Paul George from having big games, and the Clippers have already proven they have enough offensive firepower and depth to take games even when they're not shooting particularly well. While the Clippers are the clear favorite in this series, I do see the Nuggets having enough in Murray and Jokic to at least take a game or two. I'll see the Clippers win it in 6 games. And there you have it. To recap, I have the Raptors beating the Celtics in 7, the Bucks beating the Heat in 7, the Lakers beating the Rockets in 6, and the Clippers winning against the Nuggets in 6. That's my preview and predictions for the second round matchup, so look forward to seeing it. If you want further breakdown of the first and second round, check out the Full Court Bresh episode 1. It's available on YouTube now, link down below. In the meantime, we'll see how things play out in the second round, and I will check in with y'all for the conference finals.